My name's Robbie Luckett. I'm director of the Margaret Walker Center and professor of history at Jackson State University. Today is September the 22nd, 2021. It is 1:01 p.m. Central Time, and I am joined today by Auntaneshia Staveloz. Auntaneshia, would you state your name and spell it for our record?
Sure thing. My name is Auntaneshia Staveloz. Auntaneshia is A-U-N, like Nancy, T-A-N-E-S-H-I-A. Last name Staveloz, S-T-A-V like Victor, E-L-O-Z like zebra.
Do I have your permission to record this interview?
You sure do, yes.
Thanks. Auntaneshia, let's begin with some background information on you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how you grew up, your family background, your education, those kinds of things?
Sure thing. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was born to a dad that was a high school graduate, went straight from high school into the factory to work, and a mom who I learned later, but a mom who was a teenage mom early, who was a high school dropout, met my dad after having a 2-year-old, and later received her GED. Stay-at-home mom. My mom had 5 children before the age of 30. Dad working in the factory, 3rd shift. Mom staying at home with 5 children. Big and going to church, Pentecostal. That's the shouting and the clapping in the hands. Every Sunday, Sunday school, and things like that. While my parents were not did not go to college and that sort of thing, education was always the primary goal for all their kids. They said things like, do better than me, meaning get an education, get great jobs, and things like that. And so education was stressed with us, and I took that literally. So I tried to do the best I could academically. I thrived in school. I liked school, math and science in particular. I ended up going to a gifted and talented middle school, a college-bound high school, and grew up watching shows like The Cosby Show, where the Cosby kids, you go to school, you do good, you go to college. Going to college was it was a thing in my mind I knew I was going to do. How to do that and get there, pay for it, that was not even a conversation. No one could help me figure that part out, but I knew I was supposed to get to college. And I got there. One goal I had as I went through high school and education, knowing that I was going to go to college to do something great, what I wasn't sure about, was growing up in an inner city. Violence, gang violence, teenage pregnancy at the time when I grew up was a epidemic. We were Little Milwaukee, Wisconsin, predominantly Black. Southeast Wisconsin was in global news for its high teenage pregnancy rate. I knew that if I got a good education, I was going to get out of Milwaukee, leave. And I made that goal. I ended up going to college, zero money. And a recruiter came to my high school, and I was just in the hallway for a guy that came, a recruiter, and I was like, "Ooh, I'm going to go." I was a cheerleader, and me and my friends were like, "Yeah, let's go hear this guy talk." And of the different recruiters that came, he was the only one that spoke about the program, some university I never heard of, and said, "I'm going to come back and take a group of you back to the university so you can see what it's all about and get a sense of it." I ended up going to that school for that reason, and he helped me navigate finding loans. I have a lot of loans still, loans to get through college. And he followed on his word. I went to a predominantly white university, a Catholic university, where I started out, I should say, just to fast forward, because we don't have a lot of time just to go over my life. I ended up majoring in biology with an initial intention of becoming a doctor, which quickly changed when I did a observation with the doctor, MD and a DO, and learned that I was more interested in helping people in a way that helped them socially, emotionally, which was a counseling track versus medicine and prescriptions. I stayed with my major of biology, had minored in chemistry and psychology. After undergraduate school, there was like, okay, what am I supposed to do now with the biology degree, not going to medical school and a minor in chemistry and psychology? I had an opportunity to go to graduate school, which was fully paid for. I ended up going to a school that gave me a full graduate assistantship in housing, where I pursued a master's degree in what at the time was called guidance and counseling. It was a helping thread. I did it with the focus on community counseling, thinking that I would work with people like myself as a kid growing up, underserved, ethnic minorities, low income, to help them in some way. And I was going to become a community counselor. I did practicums in high school, and worked with inner city kids in high school, counseling. I was good at science, so I taught them science as like extracurricular thing. And I also was a cheerleader and I danced in undergraduate school, so did the like after school things with the kids in that vein. At the same time, my other research interest was gender equity. And so through my program, my master's program, I did group counseling, mixed gender, I did women's counseling groups. I worked with homeless and low-income folks doing different counseling things and was a helper in some way. I always had a destination to be a helper in these different ways. Got my master's degree. What the heck am I now going to do with a degree in biology and now in guidance and counseling? Back in those days, you go and find a job in a newspaper. Got a newspaper, had my resume on my pastel pink paper, and started looking for jobs. The job that I ended up finding that seemed to marry my academic background was a museum that was looking for someone that had a background in science and had experience working with underserved, what they called at the time at-risk youth. A marriage made in heaven. I applied for this job, I got this job, and the initiative I started working on as a project director was called Youth Alive, Youth Achievement Through Learning, Involvement, Volunteering, and Employment. My job was to work with at-risk youth, underserved populations, low socioeconomic, ethnic minorities, to teach them science, to become explainers or docents in the museum. This was at a predominantly white institution. It was Cranbrook Institute of Science in a very rich, affluent suburb of Metro Detroit, but Bloomfield Hills, very rich. I worked with these young people in this institution where that was grant funded, eventually going mad to the point where I wanted to leave. My program was othered. It was keep the Black kids in the corner, or Latino kids, poor kids. Even though I was bringing in funds, I ran the program as well as did public program and education for general public as well. And I'm working day, night, and it wasn't enough. I was getting frustrated, and I'm starting going to files and paperwork and found that I was supposed to be attending a regular set of professional development courses that supports this network that exists nationally. So I finally go to this first one. I'm pulling my hair out, found the person who was in charge of it. Deanna Beam was her name. She was connected with the Association of Science Technology Center. That was my first professional association that I was a part of. She like wrapped her arms around me as far as you're a part of a larger network of folks, not just you at your site. I went at the time with my supervisor. I was in the education department. We show up, I pre-registered and had all my stuff in order. I'm with my supervisor at the time. They give them my name. My name is Auntaneshia. Okay, they look me up on the list. Okay, here you are. Here's your packet. Go in. And my supervisor's next to me, and she gives her name. And there's like, oh, I can't quite find you. Who are you with? And my supervisor says in real time and real quoting the words, I'm with this gal. And I step back. People at the table are appalled and like, okay, we now understand the desperate phone calls I was making to people I was finding, who I became a part of this working network of folks. I was 22, first job, museum work is the only profession, is my entire professional career. That was back in, starting in the museum field in 1998. I've been in museums, starting in science museums, natural history museum, science center, which is different from science science museum, science center, whole other thing. um, and was able to navigate that into promotion work, going from working with K-12 schools to community-based things, and partnership development was a growing part of my work. From my entry-level position at that place, I positioned myself and put myself into things where I saw growth of partnerships, this connected to this connected to that. And so I got a chance to do work with my youth, work generally in the museum with education, public programs. I got to do different events, putting what we would call non-traditional partners together, connecting them to the museum to broaden its visitorship, which led me to be kind of cherry-picked and recruited out of that job to move. I was single, no kids. I would move at the drop of a hat to follow a career path. Went from Metro Detroit area, stayed there 5 years to, that was about the average, moving to Toledo, Ohio, where I was recruited to be a senior director of education. They wanted me to start a program similar to the youth program I ran at my first museum, where I wrote a grant and got them their first National Science Foundation grant to fund this program, where I designed it to be serving kids of color, low income, all girls. It was a girls program. So building confidence, mentorship for girls in science, which was an underrepresented group of folks in STEM education, STEM careers. And so I did that, and that grew based on my technical knowledge of science, my work as a supervisor, my management style, my organizational development things. I went from starting that program and growing into taking on the entire education department. Closer to when I got an opportunity to leave, my director at the time wanted me to take on exhibitions and and growing my role at that place. I ended up going from there to
what was that organization in Toledo?
My next was Coastside Toledo, Center of Science and Industry. The original Coastside is in Columbus, Ohio, still there. The one in Toledo actually closed, or I should say it was renamed after I left because it was going up for a millage to get money from the local government. That didn't pass. And so it closed for a little bit and reopened under another name. And still exists today, but it's smaller and it's not the same. Went from there, and from there, I was involved and already connected to another network of folks under an umbrella called SEALS, Center for Informal Learning in Schools was the umbrella. That was trying to look at practitioners in the museum field of how we build and grow assessment and evaluation of the work that is happening in museums, moving from anecdote to research-based work. And so I left that job to go full-time into a fellowship opportunity in London, England. I was based at King's College University, working again with a network of folks across different types of museums, of professionals that were taking on this opportunity to become PhDs in the field to build research around practice. I was going along fine until I became ill, deathly ill, where I had to discontinue my PhD work and took a break. We'll just say I took a break to recover. In that time, I had a child and was married in the time of my recovery. So I did a little bit of consulting work within the field, some research analysis work after leaving that fellowship program. But even in that fellowship program, I was able to I did research working with Black Caribbean males in the UK, and they're researching low achievement in STEM and the low uptake of STEM related careers. I did group work with them. And some education. And then on a sideline, I did work with girls in science as well. All of my peers in that program living in London, England, were placed with different sites already established. And they were like, oh yeah, you go to this place. I had to identify my own partners build relationships, find them on my own, which I did. I made one initial connection. It was a community-based organization, cultivated that, gave me access to schools in another organization, but I had to build my network of folks based on my research interest, which was the only one of its kind. By engaging with my local partners, with my academic advisor at the time, I was able to sit on different councils related to science, related to uptake of STEM, related to ethnic minority, diversity, inclusion at the time, a council level for like UK, some great opportunities connected to my work in diversity and inclusion, which was part of the professional development work that was done from my entry-level job when I was a part of that Youth Alive program that was really looking at diversifying not only the kids in STEM education, STEM careers, but it was really also about growing underrepresented ethnic minorities in the museum field broadly, which was me. From there, my next job after leaving that fellowship opportunity was working at the National Museum Association, the American Alliance of Museums. There, I was exposed to all types of museums, not just science and natural history, art, history, all the others in this national space with also some international partners. It was there that I was assigned, my first job there was connected to their museum assessment program, which I'm sure are familiar with. You've probably gone through a few. That was about really organizational development and strengthening an organization in different ways, from institutional, your strategic planning, your collections, and then other areas, museum operations related. Again, I grew that because I like to be in things that interest me. I went from that to being on a diversity related initiative. I grew that into then moving and becoming connected with the president, working under Ford Bell in the strategic planning development for the entire association. So worked closely with that and was the champion and advocate and person in charge of making sure we were implementing this plan. So I got to go through that process as well as implementation. I grew that into working directly with the board of directors, assisting with the full of the board, but then also serving on their diversity inclusion committee. And it was in my later years working at the American Alliance of Museums. I was there for that transition as well, from American Association of Museums to American Alliance. Worked with a board level committee to develop what is now the diversity and inclusion policy that AAAM developed and other associations subsequently adopted. That was me. Very proud of that work. As I worked at AAM, I was one of few African-American professionals working at the museum. I was the only one working in a programmatic area. There were others that were, one was in event planning. The other one was also in event planning, conference planning. Was that it? I think that might have been it. Two in a non-education, no one in development. I was now working directly with the president. And then I also then was partnered in the government relations department of the work. As I was working with government relations, Museum Advocacy Day was developed when I was in that, between the president's office and government relations. They sent me to the Association of African American Museums conference. I was Black, so they sent the Black girl. And it was there that I was able to attend a conference, professional conference that had people that looked like me. It became a great network and support for just being Black in a space. In working with the board of directors, I was exposed to some great leaders that sat on the board when I was working there. Kinshasa Holman Conwell was a saving grace working at AAM. and Juanita Moore were two folks that were influential for lots of reasons, but seeing them in action in that space. I actually met Juanita Moore when I first started in museums before the Charles H. Wright Museum was built, or just as it was built and open and still empty of exhibitions and artifacts. I met her when I sat on a regional committee, museum council, and she was on it. She probably doesn't even remember me from then, but it was really up close and personal that I got to work with her when she and Kinshasa sat on the AAAM board of directors. They were considered troublemakers because I worked directly with the board of directors and setting up creating the agendas, the board books, and all that good stuff. They would place tent cards as to where the folks would sit. They would speak and say things out loud that we can't put those two together. Whenever they sit together, they cause trouble. So we strategically will make sure that they're not, conversing and stirring the pot. I appreciate them stirring the pot. They were not the first people I encountered as far as really challenging thinking, pushing the envelope, not in disruptive ways just to do it, but really in ways to broaden the thinking, think differently, include different audiences that have been left out. And so that was when I got closer to them. I knew them, they knew me. If I saw them walking down the street, they would know who I was and I would know who they were. And they too were in that time and space. They were ones that grappled on to me as a person of one of few in a space, trying to do things that helps and benefits the organization in these strategic ways. And working there and between partnership development, educational capacity building programs and things like that, and other professional things I did, I'll go back to AAAM, the Association of African American Museums, because I know that's a part of your interest for this conversation. I first attended AAAM in 2008, 8 or 9. I want to say 8, but I think that's when I started working at AAM, and I had to start, and I think the next conference cycle was 2009. I went for my first time in 2009. I went as a presenter to present on advocacy, museum advocacy. I presented there and started to meet people that were interested in advocacy, people that were connected to some of the programs at AAM, like Museum Assessment Program, museum accreditation and things like that, and started to get to know people. And I'm a joiner. So I'm sitting there like, oh, wow. When I go to different conferences, I don't necessarily engage in a way that it directly goes back like, oh, now I know how to conserve an object, or now I know how to do collections management, because that wasn't my job. My job was about developing systems, developing organization, strategic planning, things like that. So I sit in meetings, sessions for inspiration. Whether I'm observing a process of how the session's going, the coordination of what's happening, missing information or gaps in what's being presented. And so I sat there and I really enjoyed the experience. I met Bill Billingsley, who was sitting at some table with the sticky name tags, and it was very paper-based, checking in and getting your little name badge that came in one of those Staples Office Max pocket holders. And I didn't know who he was at the time, not the director of the association at all. And he was just so nice and friendly. And then I met someone else who was nice and friendly, and it was like coming home. And so from there was a board member that was kind of sitting next to me and was like, oh yeah, and you should become a part of this thing as a member. That was easy. I became a member. And out of that, I was being recruited to become a board member. I joined the board in 2009. I think it was 2009. I joined the board and started, I think I only was a general at-large member for 3 months, maybe 4, before I quickly became secretary, board secretary, after Nona Martin I was there with the association when they were going through low budget, little to no money, a little bit of mismanagement of funds were happening and some legalese around that. I helped navigate that process. And again, the joiner, wanting to help, not just be there and make some comments, passive comments, but really dig in. And I dug in deep, taking on as association as board secretary, which was the person that led the conferences and organized all of that. And that was when the secretary organized everything. There was no event planning team. There was no big slew of staff and volunteers that did it. And so I took on that role as a board member, did that as acting or taking on the end of someone else's term, was then voted in as secretary. I did that, stayed on the board in succession, grew and became vice president for the rest of my tenure with the association on the board of directors. My passion for the work, even though it was a lot of work, heavy work, on top of a full-time job, on top of a family, on top of children, people have asked me lots of times, like, why do you do it? I remember staying up late at night, doing things for the association as a volunteer board member. I remember taking on roles and responsibilities. I remember a graphic designer dropped out and I was literally gonna sit at my little cubicle desk and put a program book together because that is what was needed. And someone said, why do you do it? Why do you're breaking your back and doing this work? I said, I do it, not because I don't think anyone else can do it. I do it because I really believe in the mission and the purpose of this organization. It's something that I truly believe in from heart and soul, as far as its purpose fulfills something that is a part of me as me growing up from a kid in education to current day, as far as what it's trying to do as an organization. So for me, it's no brainer. I am big on volunteering. I am big on serving others. I am big on paying it forward. In thinking about and reflecting on your questions for the day, I thought about things as I work at the National Museum of African American History and Culture now, recruited by Dr. Deborah Mack to come. She observed just me working at AAM and the type of work that I was engaged in, from the programmatic piece to I was a person that organized all of the state museum associations and created what they now carry on as a state museum association, an association of state museum associations. I created that and established that and came up with all of the mechanics of that, including assessment and that government, all these things. Dr. Mack was being pulled out of her heavenly independent consultant world by the founding director, Lonnie Bunch, to create this new entity that was supposed to address the idea of this national museum, not only serving the general public in these ways about education around African-American history and culture through the American history through the African-American lens. It was also about standing with our peer institutions. We were brand new babies, unborn. But as we open, as we become an organization, how do we continue to stand with our sister institutions, other African-American museums, and that they thrive and exist, continue to exist, as long as we shall live type of thing, in other ways beyond our general public traditional ways of operating and learning. And so Dr. Mack recruited me for a position and strategically picked others that would make up what is now the Office of Strategic Partnerships. My career, by slightly design, once I got into the museums, was a matter of just connecting dots for me, following my strengths, following what I knew. I sat here and thought about your questions, and now working at African American History and Culture Museum. I am not a historian. I do not have a degree in history. I tell folks, and maybe I shouldn't say it too loud, but I take pride in this. I am not a scholar or an academic in African American history. I am a practitioner of African American history through lived experience. I don't know everything about Blackness or African American through a book and text and the people and from a textbook point of view. I've lived it. My family lives it, and I have historical or practical context for these historical things. And my love of history in its context, academic, scholarly way has deepened in that my books are up to the ceiling. As soon as someone's telling me about something that I didn't know really well, I'm clicking my one click for Amazon, and I literally have stacks of books around me all the time. I was like, I'm going to get to this because this is one that's sitting next to me now. In my retirement, this is another one these are just right on my desk on top piles of paper, and I have others. Incarceration and Blackness, slavery, reconciliation, Reconstruction. My love of it just continues. But that's who I am. The AAAM, Association of African American Museums, stays in my heart. I was a part of it at its board of directors. It is something that I identify with as a Black person, but then also for what they're trying to do with African American institutions, African American people, but also within the museum as a whole. It has become a model of practice of how they engage. When I went to my very first AAAM, I really felt like I was at a family reunion in a different way than going to some other association professional conferences. I like going and kind of being able to let your guard down a little bit, where you're not performing in a certain way because the expectation is X, Y, and Z. You can do that in your professional context, but you could also, be down home and relate to something that's non-academic or work sort of things. So it's family. AAAM is family, will always be. And I will promote it in all of its ways. As much as people think it was like gum and tape, it was blood, sweat, and tears that kept it together in a lot of ways. And I will join in those blood, sweat, and tears to make sure it succeeds in all of its ways. But it's a part of history. It can't go away. We can't erase the history of its living. It's still going. It was founded in history. Black Museums movement was a part of it, out of the Black Power movement. It's history. And so what do we do forever and ever to keep it going, to strengthen it in all of its ways as an association itself, and then how they're serving their membership base institutionally, individually. It's a part of me.
I appreciate, especially as a historian, that connection to history and to the evolution of the Black Museums movement out of the civil rights and Black Power movements. I think that's important, especially for students who will be listening to these, to know and to understand and think about. So Dr. Mack recruited you straight from AAM to come work for the National Museum of African American History and Culture. When was that?
Yes, getting hired into federal government takes a long time. I know that I started at the National Museum in October of 2014. So I would say the recruiting probably started in 13.
And what do you do for the National Museum today?
My title is Supervisory Program Manager, which means nothing in real world. I'm a senior manager in the department in the Office of Strategic Partnerships, second to Dr. Mack, who is the director. My role in this department, my role is partnership development between partnership development, staying attuned to the issues happening in the field, trends in the field, gaps in the field, from institutions to individuals. What are areas of growth? What are areas of opportunity? And how best can the National Museum listen, understand, and address these issues? A lot of our work is talking. When I try to explain to an 8-year-old what I do, even my family who are traditional non-museum goers, but of course they've come to ours. My museum, I talk a lot, and all of my talking, I travel a lot, and all of my fabulous places I've traveled, from small to big, from um, Eatonville, Florida was my very first trip working at the National Museum, all the way to Paris was my last trip before going into quarantine. The more I talk, the more I travel means the more contracting I do to formalize the work that we do, these partnerships that we develop. And so I talk a lot, I connect dots of need, programmatic needs, partnership needs, um, find the folks that are subject matter experts. We thrive on the fact that we are not experts in everything, but we know how to speak with, stand with, and connect dots with those that can help serve this need that we've gone out to the field to listen, to understand, to see, to address. So my role is moving those parts around and contracting. I said if I ever go back to get a degree, I think I might get in law. The Smithsonian requires training in contract development, and the contracts that fall under my umbrella typically, or I should say still to date, are larger complex contracts. We have contracts as small as 2,500, 5,000. My contracts go from 100,000 to into the millions. And so complex contracting that requires negotiation with the partner at an institutional level, to higher contracting and general counsel working with the lawyers and at the Smithsonian. And so I oversee that. I manage folks that take parts of projects and supporting staff development as well, giving them opportunities, and really work at a peer level. We don't really work in a hierarchical level. That's just the practice I adopted early on when I started not just working with my youth, but as I supervise more full-time folks of all ages. I had a steep trajectory of accomplishment. And so I quickly was supervising people older than me. And as a younger person, you're like, well, I don't know, because growing up, you learn to respect your elders. And for some reason, age meant that they knew more than you or something like that. But my style of management is informed by one of my favorite directors that I work with at Coastside Toledo. When I interviewed there, when they picked me from my other museum to come there, I was interviewing with the president, and I didn't know he was the president until I was in my car and finally read a business card that he gave me at the end of all of these things. He just said his name was Bill. I spoke with people that I knew were like the other senior directors, some other staff members. They told me their credential. Then I spoke to this other guy, and then he was like, yes, okay, we're gonna think it over and we'll get back to you. And he just casually passes it to me, and I'm like, okay, thank you, shook his hand, and I left. Not one point did he flex and say like he was just this important person. We had a conversation. He spoke to me about their strategic vision, what they were trying to do, areas of growth, things like that. And just that style of, it's not about I'm important to you or over you type of management, but we work together to accomplish these strategic goals.
So this may be low-hanging fruit for me, but what does partnership development specifically look like in these contracts you developed? And of course, I say low-hanging fruit because I am, of course, professionally and personally aware of some of that very direct work through the History and Culture Access Consortium project. But could you describe what, in reality, what partnership development looks like?
Partnership development, I'll go back to Eatonville, Florida, like my very first interaction, going out to the place to see the community, to see those that live in it, to see, and then have subsequent conversations with those who work in it in the museum field. Seeing it up in personal, real time, and engaging and having a conversation for me to sit back, and I can read the reports that come out and that sort of thing and have my assumptions sitting at my desk. But let me have a conversation. Let me go see the institution. Let me see where they live, the other complexities of what they're dealing with beyond, I'm trying to strengthen how I do interpretation in my museum, get it all in context. And so partnership development in our context for all of our work across contracts, across relationships is really about understanding our partners in real time, understanding what they're going through, their issues as they see it through their lens, observing what that is, and having a conversation on this is what I know, and they say what they live, and I see it, and trying to connect some dots to addressing some of the needs that are blatant as to what they're saying they need, but also sort of filtering it through a lens of other factors that they may or may not be aware of. A lot of people will always say between schools, and you sit on the board of education, but it's between schools and even museums, what do you need? I need more money. If you got more money, what would you do with that money? There's people that get a lot of money and don't do anything with it. And so you look at those sorts of gaps in operational, like if I give you money, I want to show you how to use it better, how you can stretch it in these different ways, how you can raise it on your own beyond what we may do with you. And so it's really about a conversation, and coming to an understanding, a mutual understanding of how we address it, whether it's a direct answer to the question or whether it's understanding the question and filtering these other factors to still get to the answer, which takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of talking, and it takes a lot of negotiation between local concerns, institutional concerns, and then back with our federal background of how we execute these sorts of relationships in partnership development and agreements.
What are some of the challenges and maybe unknown aspects of doing that work?
Um, the challenges, the challenges of doing this type of work is that it's not what people would consider a traditional museum practice. When you think about departments in a museum, you have your exhibitions, you have education, you have your public programs, you have events. Done and done, full stop. When they think about partnership or collaboration, they say, well, I'm education, I work with the school district, that's partnership. It is a type of collaboration, a type of partnership, but it's serving, I'm going to help support the curriculum, which is something we did when I did STEM. We aligned our offerings to what the curriculum was for the district, for the state, and beyond. That is a type of relationship. What we try to do in our relationship building is connect dots about addressing an immediate programmatic need, like curriculum materials, and look at how do you go from that to sustainable practice for organization-wide, which means strengthening your staffing, strengthening your strategic development and priority setting, strengthening your financial situation in these foundational ways. And so a challenge in that is one, those understanding what we do and the nuance of what we do, and then also the value of what we do beyond creating a curriculum, beyond serving our general public. We are trying to introduce and explain what we do differently in that there's a public audience, which is a type of audience. There's a academic school audience, K-12 academic university audience. And I think one of the ways that we're starting to describe it is a professional audience. As much as we want as many people as possible to come through the door, to see our exhibits, to buy our stuff in our gift shops, to eat our food, we also want to make sure, especially as a national museum, not just this national museum, but any national museum, if you call yourself that, you should want everyone that does similar work to what you do to be strong no matter where they are. It's great that if people come to Washington, D.C. and come to any Smithsonian, come to National Museum of African American History and Culture, but I think it's to tell our version of the African American history and culture, but African American, we don't own it. So we should be standing with, because if we value the telling and sharing and collecting around African American history and culture, we should stand next to everyone else who's trying to do that and make sure that everyone organizationally is strong to be able to tell that story, because it widens the reach, it stretches us and able to tell it in these deeper, longer trajectory ways. And there's value in that. Everyone's not going to visit our website to get, the education and information about what I can be doing in Black Lives Matter movement, or what does this whole critical race theory mean. It's not for everyone to go to just the Smithsonian African American History and Culture Museum. I'm going to come to Margaret Walker and learn a part of what that is. I'm going to go to a museum in, Memphis to learn something. Everywhere. It's interesting to see how many people have come into the National Museum of African American History and Culture on the Mall in DC that don't realize that there's an African American History and Culture Museum right in their own city. That's part of what we do as well in our work, which is not a common thing that people are communicating out to folks. Of course, we want them to come here, but I want them to go to other places as well, especially when it's local, when it's affordable, when it's accessible to them right there.
How has that work had to evolve in the last 18 months in the context of COVID and this ever-changing modern world we're in?
One of a challenge is I'll start with a challenge and how it's changed, a forced change. A challenge in the COVID times is that relationship building, cultivating relationships is diplomacy. Diplomacy is best if you can do it in person. You can see facial expressions, body language, all those nonverbals that are as important as the words that are coming out of someone's mouth. So that's sort of one of the challenges of the situation. But in the situation where we have been forced virtual, my department strategic partnerships continues to work remotely in our home space, which requires a whole other social emotional adjustment to how you engage with your work. It's pushed us in a good way, to go into this digital space, and that while we cannot be in person, that we've been able to do virtual well, figuring out ways of not just one-to-one how we are today in a Zoom meeting, but how do you try to bring or insert that in-person feel. In my most recent advisory committee meeting for the HCAC, the History and Culture Access Consortium, well, we, part of socializing or getting to know people is the talking and being, together, but also you do it around food. Everything around food in my family is always a good time. Not to be overeaters, but socializing, the social aspect. And so we added a social aspect to that meeting by mailing out a snack. So we had a virtual snack break where you physically had a snack to eat. And just being more innovative in how we engage and try to make sure it's an authentic engagement, and still meaningful, even though we can't be face to face and commune together. It's been challenging, but it's built up our acuity around use of virtual, and trying to find joy in it. And then also having to train others up, which has been a challenge generationally.
So thinking generationally and the impact on new generations of museum professionals, particularly in the Black museum field, I'm wondering, one, and you've mentioned some people, who are those folks who've impacted you the most in the field and why? And eventually there'll be a follow-up question to what you would want to impart and recommend to people who are thinking about entering the field. So part one, who are the people who've impacted you the most and why?
I thought about that question, and I have a good mix of folks. People that have influenced me in my career, very first person would be Deanna Bean, formerly with the Association of Science Technology Centers. I'm looking at my list or thinking through my list. All of my folks are still alive with the exception of one. Deanna Bean, African-American professional, who was a person that drove um, diversity and inclusion work from practitioner, the people, the professionals in it, as well as the people we serve, the audiences, was a huge influencer. Julie Johnson is another person, African American, who was a part of this initial project that I was a part of when I first started in museums. Um, but she also was a person that helped beyond my physical, tactical work to the emotional engagement and strengthening and perseverance needed to stay in this work as a minority within your workplace, and how to deal with some of the internal bigotry and things you experience. Elaine Human-Gurian is a huge influencer of mine. She was an acting director at my first institution, and she was not revered. People didn't like her because she was tough, she was challenging, she was changing things, and people didn't like change. I just thought she was a badass. I admired her leadership style. I admired her boldness in her decision making and how she navigated change and how she helped others to navigate change. She listened. She built relationships. She was responsive to some of the direct requests that folks had. And I like that strong, strong women. All of these women are strong. Juanita Moore, Kinshasa Holman Conwell, just legends in their own right, who are just influential in their knowledge of the field, museums, the museum field, their knowledge in the African American museum field, and their knowledge and just how they represent themselves and professionalism, the diplomacy, use of language, the use of nonverbals, navigating complex systems as you try to grow in a field. And then one that is no longer living that I'm just honored to have even met at a AAAM conference was Margaret T. Burroughs. Um, Beyond her practical practitioner in museum field and work and artists, she came the last time I saw her, and I believe she died a year or so after this conference that she attended. She was walking around giving out these pieces of paper that she photocopied off something, and it was about legacy. What will your legacy be? And it kind of makes you stop. That's something I love about AAAM conference, between its presenters, the thematic things of museum practice, and then just about the history and culture of the field, and then also something that reflects back to you personally. What will your legacy be? And so I think about my own life and that sort of thing. One day I was in my office at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I think I found this piece of paper in my desk. It was years later. And one of my staff people at the time came in and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm sitting here thinking." "Well, what are you think?" No, she passed by. She said, "What are you thinking? You look so pensive." She said, "What are you thinking about?" I said, "Actually, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about my legacy." She was like, "Whoa, like that's like deep. I just thought you were like working on a contract or something." And I was like, "No, I try to live my life with purpose in all that I do." And I guess a lot of people think I'm very serious. I'm just so serious all the time. I used to be peppy and bubbly, and I think I am as part of me. It's a part of me, but my job is my life. I became a workaholic earlier before kids and family. I still am a workaholic, but layered on with kids and family. Um, but I still think in those ways of legacy. Who am I as a person? What am I giving back to my community? What am I giving to my children? How am I strengthening the next generation to come? Leading to your last question of what are some of the things I would tell young people that are thinking about entering the field. Something I tell young people in general is to follow your passion. There are things that you are good at that you may not enjoy. Try to find that happy medium of things that you are good at, that you enjoy, to invest in a career. You can get a job, but a career is a different thing. Career is long term, long standing. You stay in it, you grow in it. I'm the only person in my entire family that has had a job that I love, that I've grown in, and I've stayed in it. Um, that's something that's connected to a passion of mine. The only one. I have 4 other siblings. um, and I keep a job. I'm a hard worker. I'm a worker bee through and through. I guess I'm a true Gen Xer. Is that my generation? I don't know, 70s child. I'm a true of my generation. I'm a worker. Um, um, the next generation, find that passion to find a career that fits your skill and your passion. Entering this field, I think they're, especially those that say coming out of graduate school, I want to become the director, they think they should do that the next day. There's a balance of the sort of qualities that go with it, between leadership, understanding what true leadership is. It's not being the boss of people. Um, it's a balance of your own social emotional well-being and your ability to affect others in positive ways to then for them to engage in their work. Um, and being able that it's not a straight line, being able to ebb and flow with them, have that sensibility about you. I think engaging and having some experience in fundraising, like what does that mean? Even if you've raised $10 before, what does it take to do that? I think people going through these museum studies program, I didn't even know that was a thing when I entered museums. I didn't have a museum, I didn't know that was a thing. Um, I was like, people go to school to do this. Mine just seemed to line up based on my trajectory. But when people engage in these programs, since it seems to be more and more people are doing it in these sort of straight line sorts of ways, my job, the type of skills needed in our department is not a straight line of education. Even if you went to a museum studies program, it's not, you're not getting what you need to do the work that we do. Try to diversify your experience, your classes, go beyond education and curatorial understanding, do more practical things in a museum that helps to build something, build projects that require other entities. Um, Building skill in conversation, problem solving, um, conflict management. There's a sensibility that one needs to navigate the true world of partnership development in a professional way, a civility, diplomacy, negotiation. There's so much in those skill sets of what in a program can you, how do you get to know these things and practice these things? It may be through all of education, but I encourage education on top of internships or job shadowing, building relationships with mentors, true mentors, not just someone you see in the audience and say, "Oh, that's my mentor." That's not true mentorship. Um, to engage in someone that agrees to be your mentor back, that's building a relationship and being honest in that relationship and open. Listen. One thing I would do differently is talk less and listen more. It's such a seemingly simple thing, but for someone coming into the field, an established field, a field that's rooted in history, its history is rooted in something. You don't come into a room with Martin Luther King acting like you know something because you did one thing. You stop and you listen. If Martin Luther King was there today, we have living legends. The fact that I get to work and see and engage with living legends, I humble myself. The work that we do in strategic partnerships, you have to approach with a little bit, an ounce, actually a lot of it, of humility, humbleness. You don't know it all. I don't know it all. I'm learning something every day, whether it's from one of my folks I live up to, these living legends, or if it's my 8-year-old. I'm learning something every day. I try to listen more and talk less so that you're taking in those nuggets of wisdom for you to digest and filter through your experience and how you engage in life, in your work, and grow.
As we're coming to an end of this conversation, I'm wondering what your perception is of the AAAM today and the Black Museum field, and what your vision is for it for the future.
AAAM today, I think, is a strong organization. I think as it's grown in its current state, I think it's done an excellent job of engaging younger generations in a meaningful way. I know that that was sort of the historical hump it needed to get over because it was so rooted in the people that were part of the Black Power movement that actually started these movements. And that generation lives, and newer people came behind them without a lot of showing them how to get to that place. And so I think in these recent years, and I'll say recent years, like 10 years, that that transition was happening, going from paper to, doing your membership online, not even in its current form, but like the first version of that, um, was helping to do the transition of old to new. I see that. I hope that AAAM does not get past its elders and that it's so forward that it's not giving credence to living legends, living history, living folks that still know a little bit more about X, Y, and Z, um, and not get too entrenched in some things that are just becoming the nice, shiny way of doing things. I am horrible at social media. I think there is a time and place for it, but I don't find value in the only thing a person does is post something and then they're famous and there's no work behind it. There's this sort of entitlement generation. I see it that I hope it doesn't fall into, but that it takes work to get to certain levels, just making sure they stay attuned to the work needed. We need the promotion, we need the marketing, but we still need the work. And I hope that people will do it with happy hands and happy heart, sort of thing. I can't find the right words, but that comes to mind as something that was told to me of how you engage, you volunteer to put forth something. It's not I give because I'm going to get this thing. You give to give. You give because you believe in it. You give to provide assistance and help and support with nothing in return sometimes, but growth and joy in your heart. And so I'm not losing sight of that. But I think that AAAM as an organization, I think it's done an excellent job of growing in the ways it needs to, staying current with technology, staying current on engaging young people to prepare the next generation, sort of succession planning for the association. I think it's doing a great job. Continue to grow and listen in ways that help strengthen them sustainability, fundraising, and building its revenue streams, hopefully endowment and things of that nature, because it's so tied into the health and growth of a nation. It really is. If people get all nostalgic and think big, it's not just one little place and really in one country, it's history, and history spreads beyond us. I don't know if I answered the question, but I can go off on a tangent.
Oh, that's great. I've really appreciated this conversation, Auntaneshia. Any closing thoughts or things that you want to say for the purposes of this interview?
The last thing I would say that I know I plan to say it because I say it often because I'm a product of it, is that the work of museums is excellent work to be in, because it's not just, we spoke about growing up as a kid. You get to go to museums so you can be cultured. You're cultured if you go to a museum, and so you do it for those reasons. It is about culture, expanding your knowledge about different ways of life, different things, concepts, is the work of museums in all of its different ways. And then as far as working in a museum, there's different ways to insert yourself in museum work. Like I said, I'm not a history person and I work at a history museum. Look closely at museums and all the ways that they work, and that people will recognize, I've got an MBA, I have accounting, they have finances in museums, they have event planning in museums, they have all of these different nuanced things. There's science background people in history museums, chemistry, all these things. And so think broadly as people venture out into the world, into their career selection, and think in non-traditional or just not the straight line, but try to find the wavy road, because those roads are more fun to me. But don't feel discouraged if things aren't in a straight line.
Auntaneshia Staveloz, thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this and I'm deeply grateful for you.
Thanks, Robbie. I appreciate it as well.